when the MLS and NFL expansion videos. I'll make them if the MLB expansion video reaches 1,000 views. Well, I'm a man of my word. At long last, I'm finally talking about the NFL on this channel. In this video, I will be discussing my idea for a 40-team National Football League. Now, I want to make it clear, I don't think the NFL is going to make it to 40 teams, at least not anytime soon. But I think that there are a lot of great cities that deserve football teams that don't already have them, or at least not an NFL team. And you know, the NFL is a prestigious league. There's a lot of money involved with it, and it gets a lot of viewership, so who knows, maybe someday it'll reach 40 teams. But for now, I'm just making this video for fun. Now, unlike my NHL, MLB, and NBA expansion videos, go watch those if you haven't already, I'm not going to be showing a graphic with all the divisions and what divisions I think that these new teams should fit into, just because I don't feel like it. But hey, that's what the comments are for. Drop your own fantasy division alignments. Alright, enough wasting time, let's get into this. We're starting off with a controversial one, Honolulu. I think Honolulu would be a great place for a potential NFL team, but a lot of people don't think so. So I'm going to run through all of the common objections to Honolulu getting a team, and I'm going to offer my counter to those objections. Number one is that Honolulu's too far from the mainland, and it will cause too much jet lag for the players. While Hawaii is pretty far into the Pacific Ocean, keep in mind there's a week between NFL games, so that's plenty of time for players to adjust to the different time zone. Besides, it's not like NFL players don't have experience traveling between time zones anyways. The second common objection is that Honolulu's too small, and Hawaii's too small in general. Well, you know what? Green Bay has a team, and their metro population is way smaller than Honolulu's, okay? And keep in mind, this is only for like 8 or 9 home games in the year. I think that out of 1 million people, you'd find a decent amount of people to fill a football stadium for 8 or 9 games. If Green Bay can do it, so can Honolulu. The third objection is that there aren't enough football fans in Hawaii. Really? Really? If you think that, then explain this. And this. And this. You'll get what I'm saying, right? I don't think Hawaii should get a team in the NBA, MLB, or NHL just because since it's so far away, all those leagues would have to spend so much money on jet fuel. Not to mention all the traveling between Hawaii and the mainland would get super tiring for the players, especially in Major League Baseball. But with the NFL's short season and weekly format, I think that Hawaii's isolation is more of a benefit than a detriment. With Hawaii being so isolated, it would be easy for any potential team to build their identity here. And since the weather's so fantastic in Hawaii year-round, there will be plenty of great nights for football. Portland's up next. You know, I'm really surprised Portland doesn't have an NFL team yet, considering they have more people in their metro area than Jacksonville, Green Bay, and Indianapolis. As of right now, Portland's counterpart to the north, Seattle, is the only city in the Pacific Northwest that has an NFL team. If you've traveled up and down the West Coast, you've probably seen a good mix of Seahawks, 49ers, and Raiders supporters, and that leaves a pretty obvious gap where Oregon is. So, why should Portland get a team? Well, like I mentioned, the population's already there. There's the obvious rivalry with the Seattle Seahawks, and the state of Oregon has pretty good football culture already. As for the city of Portland itself, it has pretty good bones as a walkable city, which is ideal if you're trying to build a good fan atmosphere. I think you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find a city on the West Coast that deserves a team more than Portland. Next is Salt Lake City. I've seen Salt Lake City mentioned in my comments under similar videos before, so I decided to finally include it. Salt Lake City is a little on the smaller side, but that's never stopped the NFL before. Salt Lake City is no stranger to the professional sports scene. They have the Utah Jazz and Real Salt Lake, and they even had a pro football team not that long ago, the Salt Lake Stallions of the AAF, which I'll talk a bit about later. And if you look at a map of the United States, you can notice that there is a large disparity of teams on the western half of the continent. A team in Utah would be better to balance out traveling schedules. And also, since there are some other teams nearby, like the Broncos and Raiders, it would encourage fans to travel to see their teams on the road. And road trips in this part of the country are super beautiful. Despite Salt Lake City's high elevation, the weather is actually surprisingly forgiving, even during the colder months, so you don't have to worry about freezing when you go to a football game here. Like I said, there are potential rival teams nearby, and the city has already had a taste of professional football. The only really discouraging thing is the city's relatively low population. But that's where the NFL's short season format works in its favor. It's not that hard to sell out a football stadium 8 or 9 times a year, so I'm inclined to believe they could do it, especially when you remember that the Jazz play 41 home games a year, and they draw pretty good crowds. Salt Lake City gets overlooked a lot, but I definitely think it deserves to be in the conversation. Do you remember the Alliance of American Football? No one would blame you if you don't. Maybe you watched it and it faded into a distant memory and you had forgotten all about it until you watched this video. Or maybe you haven't heard of it at all. The AAF was another attempt at creating an alternative football league. This idea wasn't exactly unheard of. The XFL had tried it before. The USFL is trying it now. The AAF existed in 2019 and didn't even see the end of its inaugural season. Throughout my very limited time of watching the AAF, one team in particular stood out to me. I am of course referring to the San Antonio Commanders. The Commanders drew pretty good crowds for their games, even in a league that was considered by some to be second-rate football. They created a lot of energy in the dimly lit Alamo Dome. You know, I've wondered for a long time, why is it that a city as big as San Antonio doesn't have more sports teams? And the answer's actually kind of obvious. In fact, I'm surprised I didn't figure it out sooner. San Antonio doesn't have more sports teams because unfortunately, they have to share a state with Dallas and Houston. And I guess it kind of makes sense. Like, if you ran a sports league, right, and you wanted to put a team in Texas, which ownership group do you think you would grant a team to? A team in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a team in Houston, or a team in San Antonio? Chances are you're gonna pick Dallas, Fort Worth, or Houston over San Antonio, right? Like, who wouldn't? But I feel like people forget that San Antonio is pretty big in its own right, so like, how am I gonna not include it? You cannot tell me that San Antonio wouldn't be a good place for an NFL team. A San Antonio team would easily form a rivalry with the Cowboys or the Texans, or both. The city boasts over 1.5 million people, with 1 million more in the metro area, and probably a lot more in small towns within driving distance. And above all else, like I already mentioned, the passion for football is there. It's been proven. I rest my case. Next up is Austin. Some people might think it's redundant that I'm including two cities so close to each other in the same video. Well, sadly for those people, I don't value their opinion at all. If San Antonio's overshadowed by Dallas and Houston, then Austin's really overshadowed, relative to how much attention they should get, of course. So, let's talk a bit about Austin. It truly is a city on the rise, as evidenced by the glassy condos visible in this photo. The city has a booming tech sector, and along with it, a growing population, so the time is now for new sports teams in the city. Austin's first pro sports team, Austin FC, began playing in 2021. The city built a brand new stadium for the team, and you better believe they fill it up for every home match. So that says a lot of good things about Austin as a sports city. As more and more people are calling Austin home, I think it should be at the forefront of discussions about NFL expansion. Next is Oklahoma City. I was originally going to put Birmingham here, but I decided to go with OKC for a few reasons. 1. Oklahoma City has more people than Birmingham. 2. Oklahoma City has a growing population and Birmingham has a shrinking population. And 3. The average household income is higher in Oklahoma City than in Birmingham. Anyways, enough about Birmingham. Let's talk about OKC. Oklahoma City, despite being moderately big, only has one pro sports team, the Oklahoma City Thunder. And, well, I think that a city of its size shouldn't only have one sports team. Oklahoma City is within driving distance of Dallas, so that makes for a good potential rivalry with the Cowboys. And the state of Oklahoma already has very good college football culture. And I know someone's gonna say, well, college football fans don't necessarily translate to NFL fans. And yeah, I know that. But you can't seriously look at this picture and tell me that pro football doesn't have a chance of working in Oklahoma City. If OKC can be a basketball town, then it sure as hell can be a football town. Next up is Detroit. I think Detroit deserves an NFL team because... Wait, what? Seriously? You being for real right now? Okay, I am being told that apparently Detroit already has an NFL team? Nah, that's gotta be cap. I'm looking it up. I'll be damned, Detroit actually has a professional football team. But they sure as hell don't play like one. Next up is Toronto. Finally, a city I'm qualified to talk about. Now, first of all is the elephant in the room. It's in a different country. Well, if you ask me, that really shouldn't matter. The MLB and NBA weren't afraid to broaden their horizons. I think that the expansion of the NFL into a new country could be a huge success. Now, some of you might be saying, but what about the CFL? Yeah, newsflash, buddy. Hardly anyone cares about the CFL anymore. The CFL's fan base tends to be older people, and attendance has been gradually declining over recent years. Toronto getting an NFL team would just be the final nail in the coffin for the CFL. But anyways, let's talk about the city itself. Toronto is much bigger than the average North American city. Its metro population is greater than the metropolitan populations of all the cities that currently have an NFL team except for New York, LA, and Chicago. I used to live in the city, and I visit it somewhat regularly, so I can say from first-hand experience with full confidence that there is demand for football in this city. The Bills are pretty popular here, but if you walk around on the street, you're bound to see people wearing merch for other teams such as the Cowboys, Steelers, Eagles, and Patriots, just to name a few. Hell, I'm willing to bet that the NFL is more popular than the CFL here. The fans in Toronto love their teams. They are a passionate bunch. They have proven time and time again that they will come out in droves to support their squads. It won't be any different with an NFL team. I mean, there have been NFL games played in Toronto in the past, and just look at these crowds. The success of the Blue Jays and Raptors is solid evidence that Toronto is a great city for sports that are traditionally more popular in the United States than in Canada. The thing that hurts Toronto's chances of getting a team, as well as most of the other cities that I've mentioned, is the fact that it just doesn't have an NFL stadium. I mean, there is the Rogers Center, but it only seats about 50,000 people for football games, which isn't enough. So until the city gets a proper NFL stadium, the chance of them getting a team is very low. But you know what? That doesn't change what I said. I still think Toronto would be a phenomenal place for an NFL team, more than any of the places I've listed so far. I hope one day Toronto gets an NFL team, but until that happens, I'll be waiting. So before I reveal the final city, here are the 8 honorable mentions that didn't make it to the final list. I already mentioned that San Diego and St. Louis wouldn't be on the list, but I had to give them a mention anyway. I think all of these cities have something going for them in terms of getting an NFL team, some more than others, but I can only include 8. Who knows, maybe someday we'll see an NFL team in one of these places. But now, on to the final city. Surprised? Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Yes, I think it's time that the NFL expands to London. Understandably, a lot of you might object to this, but I think it's a good idea. And here are a few reasons why. Number 1, London is absolutely massive. It's way bigger than the average NFL city. And not to mention all of the people that could potentially travel into London by train. Number 2, if the NFL were to expand to Europe, London would make the most sense due to the lack of a language barrier. Number 3, the NFL has been doing London games for over a decade now to huge success. I will even admit these are way more successful than the Buffalo Bills games in Toronto. These games sell out. There are people in the UK who are genuinely invested in the NFL. It is remarkable to see a country overseas so interested in an American sport. It's like watching worlds collide. The NFL makes a ton of money from these games in London. It's no wonder other leagues try to copy them. Since the NFL started doing games in London, the Jaguars have grown a considerable fan base over there. Other teams too, but especially the Jaguars since they play there so frequently. It might not even be a stretch to suggest that there are more Jaguars fans in the UK than in Florida. The increase in popularity in the Jaguars is all the proof you need that the game has grown in the UK considerably. It's happening right before our eyes. You can't deny it. The NFL games in London might only be at one time of the year, but that doesn't mean there isn't year-round support. The NFL is well televised in the UK. People gather to watch the Super Bowl and the draft. The NFL in the UK isn't just a once-a-year novelty, like a country fair. It's something that has legitimate enthusiasm behind it. Now obviously, there are some logistical road bumps. Different country, different time zone, players that might be hesitant to play outside of the United States. But hey, the NBA and the MLB had to go through those hurdles when they expanded outside of the US, and it ended up being a success for them. The population is there. The fan base is there. There are even some politicians who would be on board. Not to mention, there are multiple suitable stadiums in London that an NFL team could play at. Wembley Stadium and Tottenham Hotspur Stadium come to mind. Putting a team in London might be the biggest risk the NFL ever takes, but I think that the potential payoff would be absolutely massive. And that's my list. Here are the 8 cities on a map. You know, in hindsight, it's a bit weird that I included both Honolulu and London because those two cities are like 11 or 10 hours apart depending on the time of year. But whatever, this video is just for fun. Now before you click off, there are just a few things I want to say. First of all, thank you so much for the support that you have given the previous expansion concept videos, especially the one I made about the NBA. That video has over 16,000 views now, which is more than any other video I've ever made. And it's thanks to the popularity of that video in particular that I am now over 800 subscribers. Thank you to all of you, whether you subscribed this week or you've been subscribed for over 5 years. Although my channel still isn't big by any means, I still appreciate all the support I get. You know, I'm just a kid in his bedroom making videos. No one has to subscribe, but over 800 of you have, and that really means the world to me. So thank you, all of you. And one last thing. Although I read every single comment I get, I don't reply to all of them. So if there's something you want me to reply to, for whatever reason, I would highly recommend joining my Discord server, which I will link in the description. That is the best place to engage with me, and there are lots of other people there too. So please consider joining. I'm really trying to grow this community. With that being said, thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.